My name is Amnon Kruvi. A little bit about myself. I'm a Salesforce developer and architect. I have my own product on the AppExchange, which is how I know about the security review. 3 times MVP, 14 times certified. I also come from the London Developer User Group. So feel free to say hi if you ever join us there. And today we're going to be talking about the Salesforce security review. This is a brief list of topics that we're going to go through. And we'll start with, and I'm sorry, I can't do the thing with the chair like Captain America does, but let's pretend I am. So you want to build an app, and these days anyone can build an app, whether you're a developer or if you only have declarative capabilities. Salesforce offers plenty of tools to build applications, and you can sell those tools to other people. Now, one option that you have is to sell your application through the AppExchange. You don't have to, of course, but the AppExchange comes with quite a lot of advantages. Obviously, people go to the AppExchange when they look for new applications. That's their first source. It also provides a measure of trust. You know that when an app is on the AppExchange, that it's been looked at by Salesforce. It is a real thing. There's no scam behind it. And you also get tools from Salesforce. You get support from a partner manager. You get tools to manage licenses. You get to do all of these things just by being on the AppExchange, and it's definitely worth it. Now, the thing about the AppExchange is that it does require a level of commitment and financial investment, because the security review, which you have to go through in order to be listed, is not free. It's about $2,500, which if you're a solo developer trying to launch a product, can be a lot of money. If you have financial backing, maybe less so, but for a lot of people just trying to get started, it does represent a proper commitment. Now, when we mention those words security review to someone wanting to launch a new product, this is usually the reaction that you're going to get. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And that's because the term security review is actually made up of two very scary words. The first word is security. You think security, you're thinking airport security, bad things happening, something that's very stressed and tight. And then a review is someone else looking at your things, trying to give, or trying to break it, really, trying to find faults with what you've done. So a lot of people, myself included, when I got started with Salesforce, I was scared of the security review. But today, I'm here to shed light over what the process actually is and why it's not something to be dreaded, but it's something to be embraced. And just Right. So that is like the intro about what is security review, right? And this is a bit more in depth. So what is the security review? First of all, you get your application looked at by real people, right? You and me, it's not a machine, well, there is a code scanner that is a part of it, but there's an actual person going into an org, looking at your app and trying to break it, right? They look for things like the basic security flaws, whether you're exposing information to users who should not be seeing it, when you don't enforce record level security or object level security, or if you use without sharing. They also try to hack your application using a wide variety of attacks. You know, you've got a whole sorts of OWASP best practices to follow: reflected XSS, stored XSS, SOQL injections. There's a bunch more that that they will be testing. And of course, you gotta be using best practices if you want to pass. So if you have any of those queries inside for loops, something that's going to break your governor limits, then prepare to fail as well. Now, if you can leave today with just one lesson that you can take home with you, is that the security review is not something that you should be concerned with just before you submit for review. It's not something that you should worry about when you finish your application. In fact, it's something that you should consider at every stage of development. From the very first design stage, you got to ask yourself, how will this be affected by user profiles? How can I gracefully handle a user that can't access the record? Will I have to make any exceptions? Obviously, when you build the code, when you write it, it's very easy to run a query and just assume you're going to get the values that you need. But what if you don't? What if the user doesn't have access to this particular field? How do you gracefully handle it? Right? It should be part of your testing process. You need to have another user on a lower privileged profile to use your app and see what happens, that the whole thing doesn't crash. And obviously, as you gather feedback and try out your new features with clients or beta testers, you have to worry about how they're using it, whether there are any, whether there's anything that can be compromising to their security. And if you don't take this into account, you're going to see this screen quite a lot. I don't know if any of you played Dark Souls, but this is like the you died screen that you see all through the game. The security review is not easy to pass. I think more than half of apps going to the security review the first time fail it. And it also takes a lot of time to pass. So when you do plan for it, you have to set aside a good chunk of time, at bare minimum a month, but more closer to 3. And do prepare to fail. Everyone does. There's no shame in it. You just gotta persevere. Now, the purpose of the security review and the reason why so many people fail is because, let's face it, most of us are developers, even architects. We're not trained cybersecurity experts who spend all day, learning about 0 days and knowing every single vulnerability in every single product. And because we're not cybersecurity experts, then it's good to let our application be reviewed by people who are trained, who know what sort of attacks are common on Salesforce and how those attacks are replicated on the platform. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with letting someone else look at your code. In fact, it's quite positive. And if you are a cybersecurity expert on this call, then, well, you should know better, because you know that there's new attacks all the time. So you should let Salesforce keep an eye on what's vulnerable and what's not. And of course, the reason why you want a secure app to begin with is because your name is on the line. Not only your name, Salesforce's name is on the line. You know, the clients often can't really tell apart an app from Salesforce itself. They think it's all one thing. So if you mess up, that will reflect on Salesforce, and they don't want that. Anyone here heard of a company called SolarWinds? If you raised your hand, I can't see you, right? You can see my screen. You know I can't see you. Now, if you've heard of SolarWinds, you know that they have suffered a giant hack by certain governments recently, and it's affected so many things, and it's been going on for years, apparently. Oh, yeah, okay, fine. You can virtually raise your hand. Thank you. um, yeah, so you know exactly what's been going on with them. Keep your hand raised if you are going to make any sort of, if you're even going to consider buying from them within the next 5 years, even if they offer their product for free, knowing what they've been through over the last few months, right? It's very unlikely that anyone is going to consider that, because once you have such a giant security breach, that's it, you're struck off. So you don't want that happening to you. And going through a rigorous process where you can fail, people will try to break your application. It's a great thing in the long term. Not only a great thing, but now with the whole concept of data protection laws, you know, GDPR and the US data protection laws, it's actually up to you and your customers to protect your data. And if you don't take steps to protect your data, you could be fined. Simple as that. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the law. This is the sort of roadmap that you will follow in order to get your app listed. So before you can do anything, you're working on your app, then you register as an ISV partner or an OEM partner if that's what you need. You need to submit a business plan. The business plan needs to show Salesforce that you're serious, that you can potentially be profitable, and more importantly, that Salesforce can also take their cut, because any app sold through the AppExchange, there's a revenue share scheme. So Salesforce takes a certain percentage. And that process as well can take quite some time. So I think for me it was maybe 8 weeks or something. So leave a fair space for that as well. You can do it before you've completed your app, even if you're not ready for security review yet. So if you do want to build an app and have it listed, register as an ISV partner as early as you can, so you can get that out of the way. When you feel that you're ready, when you want to list your app, you want to review everything, right? If you followed my advice, you will have kept the security review in mind throughout the design of your application, but that doesn't mean you never missed anything. So review it again, go page by page, module by module, class by class, and look at the code. Try to think, if I were a hacker, if I wanted to breach this, how would I do it? Does every query check for profile permissions? Do I use any classes that use without sharing when they don't really need to be? In a lot of cases, you also, you might be using things that could be identified as a security breach, but they're for very legitimate purposes. For example, there are very reasonable scenarios where you'd want to use without sharing. There are reasonable scenarios where you don't want to check profile permissions when you query an object. For example, if you have a configuration object with metadata in it that the user does not interact with, but the app needs to be able to read. In those cases, you have to start writing documents. First of all, you need to have your technical, the technical documentation for your application. You need to have it up to date because you'll need to submit that. But also an important document is called the false positives document, which is where you list everything that Salesforce detects as a security breach, but you have a good reason for using it. An excellent tool to use, Salesforce offer a tool from Checkmarx, a Checkmarx code scanner that you can run anytime you want. It can take an hour to get the results. You can run it and it lists a whole bunch of possible vulnerabilities that you will face. You need to review this document. You need to add to either fix everything on that list that you receive, Or for things that shouldn't be fixed, you got to put them in your false positives document. And you need to include this scan result when you submit your application for review. In order to actually perform the submission, you also have to prepare an environment. So once you've registered as an ISV partner, you can create your own orgs. Do create a separate org. Don't use any of your demo orgs. Don't use anything that you need to use later. I'll talk about that in a minute. Then you submit your application to review and wait for feedback and proceed from there. But how do we protect customer data? How do we make sure to follow best practices when we design our application? So a bunch of things that you need to keep in mind, and that is with every piece of code that you write, is to check profile permissions before any database action. You want to read a record from the database, check for access permission, for read permission. You want to update a record or create a record or delete a record, check those permissions. Because if you don't check them, then you will fail. And for good reason, because you don't want a community user deleting records on a production environment, right? Anything that you write without sharing needs to have a good reason. So in Salesforce, the whole sharing mechanism protects your data from access by users who are not supposed to see that record. If your module needs to see records that the user can't, you need to say why. If you have any sensitive data that you need to store, things that should not be exposed to users, for example, access tokens, usernames and passwords for APIs, all sorts of things like that need to be placed inside protected custom settings as opposed to, let's say, custom metadata types. Protected custom settings cannot be accessed by any of your clients, not even their system admin, unless you create a particular page for them. You can also check for fields that are encrypted at rest from Salesforce's platform encryption. And obviously, those fields might have various restrictions on them. For example, you cannot sort queries by encrypted fields and so on. You also need to worry about web attack vectors. So things like stored XSS, that's when let's say you have a Lightning component that queries contacts and then shows their name on the screen. But what happens when that contact has a JavaScript function inside it? Does your code handle it, or does that script run on your page? So that's a big problem, especially in Visualforce, when you use a lot of inner HTML. Sorry, that says inner text. It should say inner HTML. So anything that uses inner HTML or merge fields, right, inside JavaScript or style, where an attacker can potentially create a contact with a script inside it, and then a user would just try to view the contact information and the script will run on their browser. Obviously, that's incredibly dangerous because you can use that to write scripts that expose a whole bunch of data and then email it to you. So get me a list of all the contacts. The same exists with reflected script. So if you have pages that accept query parameters or post parameters, then you have to encode those as well so that you don't run any sort of script that might be inside them. Any inputs that your pages receive, and you use to, for example, create a query, you have to validate. So, for example, if you're trying to build a dynamic query and you get the object name as a string, then you got to make sure that the name of the object that you received is a valid schema object. If you receive field names, if you receive a where clause, then you got to make sure that you don't allow, for example, a semicolon that could break up your query into two queries. Also, you got to make sure that Lightning Locker is respected. That is, any component that you build does not interfere with any other components. So don't use any CSS or JavaScript that might affect other components on the same page. For example, you're not allowed to create a custom style tag. You have to use CSS files. You're not allowed to use a style tag. Why? Because Salesforce doesn't parse custom style tags and therefore cannot lock them to only apply to your component. Now, when we write the false positives document, we have to list absolutely everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything, even if it's something that's completely irrelevant. Sorry, the baby wants to join us. Do you want to come and say hello? Here. Say hi. So you got to list absolutely everything, even if it's completely irrelevant. For example, some code modules come with your Salesforce org. For example, the site login, right, and the forgot password and all those files that come with any standard org. Well, they don't actually pass security review. The checkmark scan actually flags those up as having problems, and they're in your org. So you're going to need to refer to those in your false positives document, because otherwise the reviewer is going to see, okay, there's an issue that the scanner detected and you didn't fix it. Therefore, you must be non-compliant. You got to list everywhere you use without sharing and explain your reasoning. Anything that you feel might be a bit iffy, that can raise any sort of question by the reviewer, just write it down. There's nothing wrong with having a long document that lists everything down. If you have chosen to do something that might be considered insecure, then explain why. Explain why it is still the best way of doing it and how you took steps to mitigate the vulnerability. For example, again, with the same example of a dynamic query. So the scanner, the code scanner, is going to flag that up as a potential vulnerability. But if you validate the object names against the schema and you validate the field names against the schema and you encode all the strings that you're getting, then the risk is greatly mitigated. And always ask yourself if there is a safer way of doing what you've done, because at the end of the day, the purpose of the security review is to make sure that you've done things in a correct and secure way. And if for whatever reason you missed this thing, then fix it. Fix it before you submit. Don't fix it after. Don't wait for someone to tell you this is wrong. You have to be the force that pushes you. This is a small sample of my own false positive document. You can see that I've listed the paths for FLS create. So that means we're creating a record without checking for field level security. And I wrote a whole 2.5 paragraphs explaining why this is necessary. So be descriptive, be explicit. Don't leave anything to chance. Because every time you fail, you're going to have to wait at least another 2 weeks. So you want to make sure that everything's explained already in the documents, and they do read them. If your application does not reside solely on Salesforce, for example, you use Heroku, or you use a third-party API from Google, maybe, then those applications need to be scanned as well. If you own the service where the API runs, the external service runs, then you need to use a tool called Chimera. And that's a tool that performs all sorts of tests on the server side. But if you don't own and don't have access to that server, then you can use a tool called Zap, which basically monitors the network transactions between you and that external service to make sure that you're not sending information that should not be sent. What are good examples of this? Let's say you have a mobile application. The first time you log in with a mobile application, you use a username and password, right? But a password is actually very sensitive information. You're not allowed to use it more than you need to. In fact, you're not allowed to store it directly on the device, because then someone who has physical access to the device can tinker with the memory, they can see what's inside, and they can get that password. So instead, you need to use things like OAuth with tokens that change each time you use them. So then even if an attacker does get an access token, that token is temporary. They can only use it for a certain length of time before it expires. Of course, always use HTTPS, always test your services manually, try to hack them. And if you are not sure about something, write it down. You will need to prepare a test environment. And as I mentioned, Salesforce will be using that test environment to try all sorts of weird things, all sorts of attack vectors. So when I came back and looked at my test environment after running it, after having the review, I had contacts with script in their names, because that's the sort of attacks they try. And they do a lot more. Like that org is completely unusable after they were finished with it. So you need to create a brand new org that you don't need. Don't use any of your existing demo orgs. Create a user for the review team, and then when you submit, you need to give them the username, password, and security token. Salesforce also offer a consultation before the review. So if you want to, you can speak to your partner account manager and just set something up if you're not sure about anything. Once you've done all that, it's showtime. You submit. You go to the partner portal. You fill in the forms. You upload your document. You pay your fee. If your app is free, you don't need to pay a fee. Yeah, if you can't fill in a form, you've got bigger concerns, right? That's the easy part, the actual submission. And then you wait. And you wait and you wait. The review process can take I think at minimum it's 2 weeks before you hear back. But depending on the size of your app, it might take longer, depending on how stressed, how much there is to test, might take longer. So you really want to try and pass it in as few iterations as possible, because imagine having to wait 3 months just to pass the security review, right? You could have clients you could be trying to sell, and you can't do that. So I actually have a rejection email from Salesforce. This is from my first submission to a security review, and I wanted to share it with you, if that's okay. With the music and everything, I swear. Right. So let's say you failed. It's not the end of the world. Everyone fails at least once. But do keep in mind that when they find an issue, they stop the review right there and they just send you the reason. You're not going to get a full list of all of your errors. And even if they found one type of issue, they're not going to give you a list of every place where that issue exists. So if you get that failure email, it's an indicator that you need to review everything again. Don't don't believe that this is just a one spot that you need to fix, just a single instance that you need to fix, because otherwise you might get trapped in that loop, and before you know it, it'll be 6 months before you can pass. But if you keep at it and you try again and you fix things and you really learn from the whole process, then you will pass. The purpose of the review is to make sure that you can build an application that is secure. And you can. If you can build a good application, you can build a secure application. And eventually you're going to get, now look at the date on this email, 2 days ago. So literally as I was writing this session, I was asked to have my application reviewed again. And that was maybe 2.5 weeks ago. And then 2 days ago, I got the email that I passed. So this is what you want to see in your mailbox. But even if you do pass it, it's not the end, because you do need to apply for periodic re-reviews. And that means, so it can happen after a year, 2 years, 3 years. There's no strict guideline for it. It's It's something that Salesforce decide using an algorithm. Some people think it might be based on how many releases you've made over a year, but eventually they will ask you to go for another review. So even after you've released on the AppExchange and you start updating and building new features and adding to your app, that's not the end of the road. You always have to keep security in mind, just like when you got started. And that's it for today. If anyone has any questions, now's a good time.
So first of all, that's a really great session, and
Thank
I
you.
can see lots of great comment for your song. So let me allow everyone to unmute themselves and ask a question if somebody have any question. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question
So
directly.
I see a question from Ankita. Why security review is not passed at one time? Why step by step? That's a very good question. I'm probably not in a position to answer why they do things the way they do. Get a bit of an echo. But you are more than welcome to ask someone at Salesforce. Once you register as a partner, you get a partner account manager. You can ask them about the internal workings and decision making at Salesforce if you'd like. So okay, Joey, how many tries during my first submission? Okay, depends on the company. At my first company, it took me, I think, 3 submissions on my first attempt, and then we had to redo it after like 4 years. And there, I was so busy at the time that I got stuck in the loop. I got an error saying, okay, this thing is wrong. So I just fixed that one thing, and then I resubmitted. And it went on for months that way, right? Like 3 or 4 months of just back and forth because I didn't have the time to dedicate to it. And when designing features, I did not design them with the review in mind because I'd never thought about the re-review. But that was years ago. That was several years ago. And with my current application, I passed both the first security review with my app. I failed the first one and I passed the second. And this time around with the re-review, I passed it first time. Limits for submission. So what I can say is that back at the former company, the security review process lasted after I left them. So I think it took in total maybe like 7 or 8 months to get through that security review, during which the app was still listed on the AppExchange. So I'd imagine as long as you're making progress and as long as you can communicate with Salesforce, there isn't any sort of hard limit. But yeah, try not to make the same mistakes I did. Do we have to pay the fees? So for free applications, you do not need to pay a fee. Free application, free review. You're helping everyone. Any more questions?